Good morning, everyone, and thank you for having me. I'm Vikram Gulati, and this talk is about consciousness, oneness, and the paradox mindset. Specifically, how inner development of consciousness shapes a leader's capacity to hold opposites. I know that this room holds two different types of expertise. Some of you come at it from a Vedic scholarship perspective, and some from management. And this paper genuinely needs both. It takes a claim from the Vedic tradition seriously enough to test it empirically using the tools of organizational research. So bear with me as I move between these two registers as I've tried to be precise in both of them. Let me start with the Vedic material because it's actually where the research question comes from and not just where this talk begins. Here is a verse from Bhagavad Gita. That which is night to all beings, in that the self-controlled man keeps awake. Where all beings are awake, that is the night for the wise one who sees. For those of you in Vedic studies, you'll recognize this immediately as a part of a much larger pattern. This isn't an isolated verse. Across the Gita, the principal Upanishads, we find opposites deliberately being paired, things like sleep and wakefulness, being and non-being, motion and stillness. This isn't sloppy metaphysics, it's a method. The pairing exhausts the ordinary discriminating intellect, the part of the mind that works by distinguishing this from that. And in that exhaustion, attention is directed towards a non dual ground in which the opposition was never real to begin with. This is, of course, the territory that Advaita and Vedanta names so directly. So here is the question I built this study around. Does the same movement from contradiction to a felt lived unity show up empirically in how today's leaders actually handle organizational tension? That is a testable question, and I want you to show what happens when you actually test it. For management scholars in this room, let me ground this in a very concrete organizational problem. Leaders of today are asked to hold opposites constantly: stability and change, control and empowerment, exploiting what is already known and exploring what doesn't exist yet, life and livelihood, something that we all felt so sharply during COVID. Colin and Porras, way back in 90s, called this the difference between the tyranny of the or and the genius of the and. Visionary companies do not choose between opposites. They hold both. More recently, Miron Spector and colleagues gave this individual level capacity a name: paradox mindset. The ability to accept tensions, feel energized rather than paralyzed by it, and search for both and responses instead of either or ones. What the management literature, of course, doesn't tell us, is what actually builds this capacity in a person. And that is where this study addresses it. So here is how the two halves of the talk come together. If Vedic texts use paradox to point towards a non-dual, unified consciousness, and if that unity is just not a poetic idea, but something a person can actually develop towards through practice, then does growing that unity also grow a leader's capacity, a leader's ability to hold opposites at work? This gives us essentially three constructs: higher states of consciousness, how often someone reports these deeper states of awareness; a belief in oneness, the felt lived sense that everything is fundamentally interconnected, as distinct from just believing it intellectually; and paradox mindset, the organizational outcome that we actually care about. I tested this specifically amongst project managers because their daily work is a lived negotiation between process demands and creative demands. If paradox mindset exists anywhere in a measurable way, it should really exist here. Briefly on the method. I know that some of you would want specifics, so here, this was a mixed method study in two phases. The first phase was the quantitative phase, where 2008 project managers responded. This was out of 948 project managers who were invited across 9 global IT companies. roughly about 22% response rate, 3 validated scales, higher states of consciousness, belief in oneness, and paradox mindset, all with strong internal reliability. And analysis was done through mediation modeling using Hayes process macro in SPSS. On the qualitative side, 20 in-depth interviews deliberately sampled across large and small organizations and across high and low paradox mindset scorers, representing 6 different practices of interconnectedness: meditation, yoga, prayer, reading, nature walk, and music. I use grounded theory coding in the Strauss and Corbin tradition to let the qualitative material explain and enrich what the numbers showed. Let's first look at the quantitative findings. Here is where it gets really interesting, and I want to walk through this carefully because the shape of the results matter as much as the result itself. Look at the correlations first. Higher states of consciousness correlates with belief in oneness, and belief in oneness correlates with paradox mindset. But consciousness's direct correlation with paradox mindset is comparatively weak on its own, a clue that something sits between them. So I ran a formal mediation analysis with bootstrap confidence intervals, and what we find here is full mediation. The path from consciousness development to oneness is significant, and the path from oneness to paradox mindset is significant. But the direct effect of higher states of consciousness on paradox mindset, once you statistically control for oneness, is not significant. The confidence interval crosses zero. In plain terms, consciousness development does not build a paradox mindset directly. It builds it by first deepening a sense of interconnectedness, and it's that felt sense of oneness that actually does the work of letting a person hold opposites without being torn apart by them. For those of you in Vedic studies, this is not just statistical curiosity. It's the empirical shape of the exact claim in the verse that we started from. On the qualitative side, let's first look at the nature of work. What came through completely unprompted from project managers was that they already experienced their work as being paradoxical. DK described his work as being split into hard, which he called process-oriented tasks, resourcing, hiring, onboarding, predictable delivery, and on the softer side, which he called as creative tasks, solutioning, design, technology framing for clients. MG put it more simply: coordination gets deliverables done daily, but the other part of the job is building a framework for something new. Both kinds of work are constant. Both are unavoidable. Nobody has to be told that their work was paradoxical. They already knew it in their own words even before I used the term. The qualitative findings really showed that the practices had 2 types of benefits. So how do these project managers not just survive the tension, but work well within it? Through personal practice, things like meditation, prayer, yoga, music, reading, nature walks, the benefits that people felt were clearly in 2 different clusters, in 2 distinct clusters. Coping benefits, things like calming down, centering, settling, feeling refreshed. VK told me that prayer helps her relax fully before a meeting, so she feels happy and peaceful and performs better. And then there was the second part, which was growth-oriented benefits: being more creative, focusing better, sharper problem solving. MG described meditation as giving him an inner peace that lets him focus so he can identify both the issue and the solution more clearly. And this second category, the growth-oriented benefits, showed up much, much more among one specific group, which were the practitioners of transcendental meditation. So you could see there was a distinct signal from transcendental meditation. That distinction was pronounced enough to warrant its own further look. When I probed further into the TM practicing project managers specifically, their language moved into a territory well beyond stress relief. MG told me it has transformed a normal, ordinary person. I don't think anymore only for myself. I constantly think about what would benefit the group and the wider community. I see the positive in everything, and that is not a description of a feeling calm. That's a description of a changed relationship to the self. RB, another TM practicing project manager, described creativity itself differently. He said, creativity needed for problem solving is largely out of our control. It's all about removing obstacles, and creativity will flow. And that I see meditation as that remover of obstacles. For management scholars, this echoes what the psychological literature calls as higher ego development and self-transcendence. For those of you in Vedic studies, this is the same territory Maharishi Vedic science names as cosmic and unity consciousness. And I would argue it's a qualitative phase of the exact statistical mediator we found in the survey data, reduced self-focus, and a felt sense of a wider community in what belief in oneness actually sounds like in a person's own words. So what does this all mean? Inner development leads to a felt sense of oneness, and that felt sense of oneness leads to a comfort in holding tension, in holding paradoxes. And that comfort in holding tension is what shows up at the leadership level, the both and thinking rather than the either or thinking. For leaders, a paradox mindset isn't primarily something you train through frameworks or willpower. It grows out of a deepened, felt sense of interconnectedness cultivated through consistent inner practice. For organizations investing time and environment for practices of connectedness, meditation prominently being one of them, is a plausible low-cost lever for developing leaders who can execute and innovate both at once. And stepping back to where we started, this connects a contemplative claim about consciousness to a measurable management outcome, the move from contradiction to unity that the Gita makes has a contemporary organizational echo. I want to be direct about where this evidence is strong and where it isn't yet. This was a convenient sample from my own professional network, so some of the sampling bias is absolutely possible. The model tested only 3 variables and leaves out things like tolerance for ambiguity or locus of control. And this is finally a correlational cross-sectional design. I really can't confirm the direction of causality from this data alone. Looking ahead, a longitudinal or experimental design randomly assigning practice of connectedness would let us test the causal impact over time. Adding performance measures would let us demonstrate business value, not just self-report. In closing, I'll leave you with this. The transcendence of opposites, glimpsed in the Gita and the Upanishads, finds its empirical echo in modern paradox mindset. Let's say that again. The transcendence of opposites, glimpsed in the Bhagavad Gita and the Upanishads, finds its empirical echo in the modern paradox mindset. Thank you.